Cool. Do you think we could open up for a few questions?
Yeah,
just
sure,
to
absolutely.
check in and see, because I feel like
So this part, by
lot.
the way, was the most complicated part of like how Bitcoin works.
What would cause the discrepancy? Like, why would one computer think a transaction happened and another would not?
So there could be multiple reasons. Some of the reasons, the nodes might be trying to be malicious, right? Like I want, let's say it's censorship. Let's say that some companies or some governments did not want something to happen. So they're saying this didn't happen, right? And
where you're trying to steal money, hack money,
someone
like
is trying
any
to
of
steal
that,
money,
right?
someone is trying to
Okay.
block something from happening, or it could be they didn't have malicious intent, but there was a network partitions and they just didn't see the data, right? And they're not trying to be malicious, they actually believe this is the version of the reality. Like imagine in our example earlier where Bill Gates was sitting in Seattle, let's say for some reason he didn't hear about a transaction. So he actually believes that, hey, this is the version of reality, but he's just out of sync.
I think if, and this might be a little high level, but if you are a coder and you've used is GitHub a good analogy, like if you use GitHub, sometimes two developers are working on a project and one person can make a change and the other can make a change at the same time. And then there's a conflict and it's like, well, which one are we going to keep kind of? And then you kind of have to resolve that.
Even the same thing happens with Google Docs. Like
Google Docs,
shared docs, right? Like let's imagine that there was a version of file that you were working on.
I got it, yeah.
And then I edited it, but Chris also did it.
Like
and
at the
then
same time.
Like we need to merge this back in, right? And but imagine that there's a conflict resolution mechanism where I can say, hey, Chris, I'm going to take your changes. I'm going to put them here. Are you fine with that? He goes like, yeah, sure. Let's just go with this version. Or we'll discard a version. So what's happening is you're discarding a version and saying, no, this is the view of the world.
Yeah.
Because that's the majority view, right? But the way that they decide on what's the majority is the complicated part, right? Because the majority is decided in a way that no single party can just like take over and suddenly become the majority. Like I can't just go and buy like 100 computers and come back in and suddenly like, hey, I'm going to take over Bitcoin. You can do it, but you'll have to spend at this point like maybe $200-300 million and then manufacture these chips. And like basically it's extremely hard to do even for a state level actor. Like even if you're a government, you'll have to spend a lot of resources and money and actual hardware before you can attack the network. And then still people would notice.
And is it clear, Chris, that like this used to be, or because currently is monitored by banks? Like if there's a conflict resolution, you're like, well, you go and see your bank statement, and it's like that's the answer, right? And so the change, or in this new currency that is being developed, this is all public. So does that mean that it's a lot more likely to be maliciously, or does that mean more mistakes are more likely because it's public or open source? Or
I think it's basically it's more auditable because the information is public, right? And I think there's a difference between privacy and the system being more public and open. Like nobody really knows who you are because you are represented as this random string of numbers. That's your address. Right, and it's not your bank account address because you can change it very frequently. It doesn't really matter. So nobody really knows who you are when you make transactions, but the history of transactions is public. So anyone can go back and audit them all the way to the beginning of time. Whoa. And the beginning of time is when Bitcoin started, right? So in a way, so this fascinates me because Bitcoin is not just the currency that the internet never had, it is also the sense of time that computers and the internet never had. Like they don't have a sense of like how time moves forward and how you can roll back time and go back to an earlier state.
Whoa.
So that's
cool.
Yeah. Cool. Other questions?
So can somebody hack it and steal money from others? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a I'm saying absolutely, that's a great question.
We're going to show you how.
Yeah. So what happens here is actually I'm kind of like thinking maybe I should run through the slides a little bit and then
Okay. Come back to this.
Come back here because there is some information there.
Because it's a lot to like digest.
yeah,
This
yeah.
is complicated.